Hey guys, so we are back. Let's do a quick recap. Oh my goodness, did we leave it drama time, didn't we? So our main character Ella, who has been living for a few months now in Boston with her mom's partner, just found out she is going back home to Alcalá, South Carolina. There was never a talk about it. Mom just decided she had a better opportunity in New York City. So she was just leaving everybody and she's just going to go off and go to New York City and do her own thing. And Helen, her partner, calls her very selfish, which I agree. Not cool, mom. But, honestly, if you look at like a character's history, right, it was not surprising. Mom was not showing that she was the best judge of consistency or character, right? She's moved around a lot, left Ella with her grandma, which there's nothing wrong with. But you can't be too surprised, right? If she decides to disappoint Ella. She's done it before. But Ella just found out, she woke up in the morning and there was a strange man in the kitchen and he's going to drive her to South Carolina. And that's it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So it's pretty devastating and pretty sad for our friend Ella. And I felt really sad for her because that wasn't very cool. All right. So, but our chapter today is about Myrna, and Myrna is Ella's cousin, her older cousin. I think she's 14. And yep, she's been raised with Ella. Here we go. Myrna. The day we got the news that Ella was coming home, George Steiny was arrested. Uh-oh. That was her beau. We'd actually made plans to see each other that day. Mostly, we'd just seen each other at school or walking home with the other kids around. But one day, about a week earlier, on the way home from school, me and George spotted a baby bird on the ground, unable to get back to its nest. She was so small and delicate. I kept an eye out for the mother, while George carefully put her back in the nest. By the time we'd finished caring for the bird, all the other kids had walked on ahead. So we walked on alone. We was passing Parker's when George said he needed to stop in for his pa and asked me if I'd go with him. I'll have an extra nickel left over for candy. Mr. Parker called to George as soon as we walked in the shop. Hey there, George. Give me a hand lifting these bags. Yes, sir. The two of them each grabbed opposite corners of a large burlap sack, full to the seams with rice. 1, 2, 3. Together, they lifted and swung the bag atop of one of the bags on the floor. Whew! Thank you, son. Mr. Parker put his hands on his hips. Now, what can I get for you folks today? Granny needed something, Myrna. Excuse me. Granny needs something, Myrna? No, sir. I shook my head and pointed to George. My pa needs a can of kerosene, sir, he said. And then we was going to get some candies. Mr. Parker went in back to get the kerosene, and I said to George, those sacks look awfully heavy. He turned to me and said in a whisper, I dang near broke my back. We both laughed, but stopped and stood straight when Mr. Parker reappeared. Here you go, George. He handed over the can and took the money for it. And what do you say I give each of you a sugar daddy for your trouble? That was a type of candy. Outside on the porch of Parker's, George said, let's use up this nickel next Saturday. What do you say? He flipped the coin up high, but I snagged it from the air before he had a chance. Hey! I took off running, and George sprinted after me, though I rarely ran unless I had to. I was considered one of the fastest runners at our school. I knew I was hard to beat, so I slowed a little. I wanted George to catch me. After I'd pretended I dropped the coin while we were running, only to retrieve it from behind George's ear. Poppy was the best at that trick. We stuck the sweet candy suckers in our cheeks and made a plan to meet up the following week for more candy. What time should I get you? 11? George asked. Just the thought of George showing up at my door with Henry leaning in all nosy and then going off and telling everybody made me shudder. Why don't you let me meet you at your house? That's better, I insisted. George shrugged. I guess it don't make no difference. Sure. We approached my driveway. Poppy's truck was there, blocking anyone's view who might be in the house looking out the window. Still, I suddenly felt uncomfortable. It was fun today, he said. Yeah, and yeah, was all I could come up with. Thanks for going to Parker's with me. I pulled my sugar daddy, now only a sliver, on a stick from my mouth and held it up. Thank you, I said, indicating the candy. George took a couple steps towards me. He was looking in my face. My breathing got shallow and my cheeks got hot. He was about to kiss me. He took a last step towards me. Any more and he'd be stepping on my feet. He leaned in, but I was so overwhelmed with nervousness that I ducked away and bounded for the front porch. When I was halfway up the drive, I turned and waved to George. Through his clear disappointment, he smiled and headed for the road. I immediately regretted chickening out, but I'd never had a boy kiss me. I just didn't know what to do. Next time I wouldn't run. When the following Saturday came, I pin-curled my hair the way Granny had shown me and wore the new red sweater I got at Christmas. I felt pretty and was looking forward to seeing George. The sky was a perfect blue, not a cloud in sight. The air was crisp, but my sweater kept me warm. I was just a short ways down the road from George's when I seen the sheriff's car coming my way. He got there before I did and turned up the driveway to George's house. I sped up, wanting to see what was going on, and saw Johnny coming out of the front porch. With speed, the sheriff was out of the car and had turned Johnny around and pushed him hard against the front of the house. Deputy Ryan leaped out of the car, flung the front door open, and went inside. The sheriff's violence stopped me in my tracks. What was happening? What had Johnny done? Realizing that I was standing in plain sight, watching, I ducked behind a tall bush, praying to not be seen. Why do you think she's praying to not be seen? What do you think it is that, why would she want to be seen right now? The voices were all loud, sharp, and agitated, but I couldn't make out what any of them was saying. Before I knew it, the sheriff had produced a pair of handcuffs, which he snapped on Johnny's wrists. Johnny kept trying to turn his head to the sheriff to get him to hear him, but the sheriff pushed him off the porch, with one hand holding Johnny's neck and the other holding the back of his trousers. He shoved him into the back seat of the patrol car. The deputy appeared from inside, pushing George in much the same manner that the sheriff had Johnny. Both hands covered my mouth to keep any sound from escaping. I was shaking all over. I wanted to call out to someone for help, but clearly Mr. and Mrs. Steiny weren't home. There was no one to call. The deputy threw George into the back of the car and they pulled out the driveway. I strained to see him, but a cloud of dust blocked my view. I heard the front door slam. On the front porch, little Amy was standing all alone and crying. As I ran to her, I could hear the police siren ring out in the distance. All right, guys, so what do you think? That was the end of our chapter. So we just had 2 boys get arrested, right? And we know that this isn't a good thing, right? History has taught us, and this book has taught us, that in this tiny town of Alkaloo, South Carolina, if you are a person of color and you get arrested, you don't have the same rights as everybody else, right? So it's not a good thing that these 2 boys were arrested. I keep thinking, seeing that picture of Annie, the little sister, Amy, the little sister, on the front porch crying, right? Her 2 maybe older brothers, I'm not sure who Johnny was, just just got taken from the house pretty violently. Like, it was aggressive. And yeah, so that's a big deal. All right, well, what a crazy thing. Let's find out what happens, right? The next chapter is going to be about Ella. And then it looks like Henry, and we are just going to keep on trucking along. All right, you guys, I want you to think about that. I want you to think about what it could mean. What could they have done? Because isn't it kind of out of character if we think about George? And George is the one that has stood up for Henry, that was telling him not to like let people push him around. He's always had Ella's back when the boys are like messing around. And he's like a really nice and upstanding citizen, right? He was helping Mr. Parker when Mr. Parker needed help with the flour bags. And so it would be pretty out of character for him to have done something illegal, right? That would have been a big, huge change in his character. So, kind of interesting. All right, you guys, thank you for letting me read to you, and I will be back with you tomorrow.